On a cold winter night in Fayetteville, West Virginia, in December 1945, the Sodder family, a loving household of Italian immigrants, gathered to celebrate Christmas Eve. George and Jenny Sodder were devoted parents to their 10 children. George ran a successful coal trucking business, and Jenny managed their bustling household with care and love. The home was filled with laughter and joy as the children played and made plans for the festive day ahead. However, no one could have imagined that this night would end in tragedy and leave behind a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Shortly after midnight on December 24th, Jenny Sodder was startled awake by a ringing telephone. When she answered, she heard a woman's voice laughing on the other end. The woman asked for someone Jenny didn't know. Confused, Jenny explained she had the wrong number, but before she could hang up, she heard faint laughter in the background. Thinking it was a prank call, she returned to bed. Moments later, she was woken again, this time by a loud thud on the roof, followed by a rolling noise. Concerned but not alarmed, Jenny stayed awake for a little while before drifting back to sleep. She would soon awaken to an even more terrifying sight: smoke filling the house. Jenny and George rushed to wake their children. The family's oldest daughter, Marion, escaped first, followed by George and Jenny, carrying their youngest child. 4 of the Sodder children managed to make it out, but 5, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were trapped inside. George Sodder's instinct was to save his children at all costs. He tried to re-enter the house but was blocked by a wall of flames. In a panic, he ran to grab the ladder he always kept beside the house, only to discover it was missing. He then tried to drive his trucks closer to the house to climb onto the roof, but mysteriously, neither truck would start, even though they had been working perfectly earlier that day. With no way to reach the upper floor, George and Jenny could do nothing but watch helplessly as their home burned to the ground, taking their children with it, or so they believed. When firefighters arrived hours later, they sifted through the ashes of the Sodder home but found no bones, teeth, or other remains of the 5 missing children. The fire chief suggested that the intense heat had completely cremated the bodies, a theory that George and Jenny found hard to believe. They conducted experiments, burning animal bones, only to find that bones never completely turned to ash. Adding to their suspicion, George and Jenny found several strange details around the property. Their ladder was discovered tossed down an embankment, far from its usual spot. The phone line, initially thought to have been burned in the fire, was found to have been deliberately cut. The Sodders began to wonder, had their children really died in the fire, or had something far more sinister occurred? Over the years, various clues emerged that hinted the children might still be alive. A woman in a nearby diner claimed to have seen the 5 Sodder children the morning after the fire, accompanied by 2 adults who seemed to be keeping them quiet. Another woman, working at a hotel in Charleston, reported seeing the children with 2 men and 2 women who acted nervously and avoided interaction. In the 1950s, George received a photo in the mail of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to his missing son, Louis. The Sodder family's investigation turned up several theories about what might have happened. One theory was linked to George's outspoken political views. He had been a vocal critic of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which had angered members of the local Italian community. Some speculated that the children were kidnapped as retaliation. Another theory suggested that the children had been taken by a child trafficking ring. The fact that no remains were found added weight to this possibility. However, without concrete evidence, these theories remained speculation. Years after the fire, George convinced a pathologist to excavate the site. The dig unearthed a few bones, but they were determined to belong to someone older than the missing Sodder children and showed no signs of fire exposure. This discovery further deepened the mystery but failed to provide any answers. The local authorities insisted that the fire at the Sodder family home was a terrible accident caused by faulty electrical wiring. They refused to reopen the case, even though there were many strange details that didn't make sense. For George and Jenny Sodder, this was deeply frustrating. They had discovered so much that didn't add up: the missing ladder, the cut phone line, the trucks that suddenly wouldn't start, and most importantly, the lack of any remains of their 5 missing children in the ashes. None of it matched the official explanation, and the family couldn't accept it as the truth. Determined to find answers, George and Jenny launched a public campaign to keep their children's story alive. They built a large billboard near their home, displaying pictures of the missing children and outlining the strange events surrounding the fire. It also offered a reward for any information that could solve the mystery. The billboard stayed up for decades, catching the attention of travelers and reminding people of the unsolved tragedy. Over the years, George and Jenny never gave up. They sent letters to government officials, hired private investigators, and followed every lead, no matter how small or unlikely. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find the answers they were looking for. George became increasingly worn down by the years of grief and frustration. He passed away in 1969, still not knowing what had happened to his children. Jenny continued the search alone, keeping their story alive until she passed away in 1989. The surviving Sodder siblings carried on their parents' fight for the truth. They followed up on new leads whenever they appeared, but they faced the same struggles and dead ends. Despite their efforts, the mystery remained unsolved. The disappearance of the Sodder children has become one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American history. It's more than a story of loss. It's a story of hope and love. George and Jenny's determination to find their children shows the lengths parents will go to for their family. Even today, the events of that fateful Christmas Eve in 1945 remain shrouded in mystery. No one knows the full truth of what really happened to the Sodder children. Did they perish in the fire, their remains somehow obliterated by a series of unusual circumstances? Or were they taken from their home, kidnapped in the dead of night for reasons that may never be fully understood? These unanswered questions have haunted not only the Sodder family, but also everyone who has come across this story. The lack of clear answers has turned the case into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history, leaving it as much a puzzle now as it was nearly 80 years ago. The idea that the 5 children might have died in the fire is hard to reconcile with the evidence, or lack thereof. Fire experts have long pointed out that a blaze hot enough to completely incinerate bones and teeth is extraordinarily rare, even in the most extreme conditions. Yet, not a single trace of the children was found in the ashes of the Sodder home. How could all physical evidence of 5 bodies simply vanish? It's a question that defies logic, and one that has kept investigators, amateur sleuths, and the Sodder family themselves searching for answers. On the other hand, if the children were kidnapped, the reasons behind such a horrific act are equally baffling. Why would someone target the Sodder family? Was it personal? A retaliation against George's outspoken views on Italian politics and Mussolini? Or was it something even darker, like child trafficking? And if the children were taken, why has no one come forward with solid information after all these years? The occasional sightings and strange clues, like the mysterious photograph sent decades later, only deepen the mystery without providing any real resolution. For George and Jenny Sodder, these questions were more than an intellectual puzzle. They were the painful center of their lives. The thought that their children might still be out there, alive and possibly in danger, drove them to spend decades searching for answers. Every strange detail, every whispered rumor, and every faint lead became a source of hope and heartbreak. They chased the truth with unrelenting determination, even as the years passed and the trail grew colder. The story of the Sodder children is also a testament to the strength of family bonds. Despite the unimaginable loss and the many unanswered questions, the Sodders never gave up. George and Jenny dedicated their lives to finding their children, and even after their deaths, their surviving children continued the search. This fierce dedication speaks to the depth of a family's love and the lengths people will go to for those they hold dear. But as the decades have rolled on, the possibility of finding definitive answers has grown fainter. Witnesses have passed away, evidence has been lost to time, and memories have faded. Yet the story persists, capturing the imagination of new generations. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly everything can change, and how some mysteries refuse to be solved, no matter how desperately we seek the truth. The Sodder children's disappearance remains a chilling and heartbreaking story. It leaves us to grapple with the uncomfortable reality that some questions may never be answered. As much as we long for closure, there are times when the truth stays hidden, locked away by time and circumstance. The case of the Sodder children stands as a symbol of both the resilience of the human spirit and the unsettling power of the unknown.